populate Africa, Central America, South America, and Asia. However, most species of monkeys are endangered. Winter holiday fun fact. A Charlie Brown Christmas almost didn't happen. One of the most beloved holiday specials of all time is A Charlie Brown Christmas. But it took ages before television executives could even convince Charles Schulz to get into the animation game. When it finally got made, CBS executives hated it so much that they almost nixed it. Execs from the sponsor, Coca-Cola, hated it too upon their first viewing. Lucky for fans of Peanuts gang television specials everywhere, A Charlie Brown Christmas made it to the airwaves anyway, premiering on December 9th, 1965. That night, it was seen by approximately half of all Americans that owned a television. It's been a holiday entertainment staple ever since, and 44 more Peanuts gang specials have been made for television. Teachers, don't forget to visit the mailroom where hot cocoa is being served today. This is Miranda. This is Sam. Have a marvelous Monday.
Marvelous Monday, last Monday, at least for a little while. So hopefully the remainder of the week is pretty smooth sailing. Today we are finally going to wrap up this whole practice DBQ thing. When I originally thought about this, I figured it would not last this long, but you know what? Sometimes that's just how it works. Hopefully by the end of this thing, you'll have at least somewhat of a better perspective on how to tackle these sort of essays. Again, is it exciting? Heck no. Trust me, I'm as bored with it as you are. But it is an important skill that you got to really be proficient at because we do a lot of DBQ essays in class, and the DBQ itself on the AP exam is 25%, excuse me, of your grade. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look back at the documents real quick because we've already spent enough time on those. I'm going to review kind of what we discussed on Friday, our little document summaries. I'll show you a couple additional examples of how you could source the document through the CAP process. And then I'm going to kind of show you some things that you could have done for your context and your thesis. Remember, in your notebook, you need to have all this stuff. You need to have your document summary. You need to have your 3 documents that are capped. You need to have a full-blown introduction for this essay as if you're really going to write it. A lot of it, hopefully, you've done already. Some of it, you can kind of use what I've done. What I'm going to show you is a foundation, but ultimately, you do need to have that in there for your next notebook check, which is going to be the Friday after we get back. So we got some time left. But make sure you're doing a good job on that. As far as grades are concerned, grades were updated over the weekend. Extra credit has been applied. Notebooks have been graded. All the late work that I had received, at least by yesterday, mid-morning, that has been put in as well. Check your grade. Some of you guys, especially on the notebook, maybe haven't turned it in yet, or maybe what you turned in didn't have everything in it. Check that out. Maybe you could still submit some of the stuff that you're missing. But if you did not turn in your notebook, right now it's a daily grade, so it doesn't look that bad. But remember, once I input the second notebook check after Christmas, that averages together for a test grade. So if you didn't turn in your notebook, you're actually doing worse than you think you are. So please get that into me as soon as possible. Late work, other than the things that were assigned before Thanksgiving break, everything else is still open. So you're free to turn in, anything that you're missing up to a point, but that will cut off eventually. So please don't wait forever. And finally, upcoming grades. Honestly, we're not going to have a whole bunch. I'm thinking maybe a couple more daily grades. You will have one more extra credit opportunity. It's going to be the same as what we've done in the past, kind of a documentary review sort of deal. And that is pretty much it. So it's really important what we have left. You turn it in on time, you do a good job on it. Extra credit, obviously take advantage of that. And if you're missing anything that I'm still willing to accept, please get that in as soon as possible. I think that's about it. Let's go ahead and get started. Everybody go ahead and get out wherever you were doing your prep sheet that we were working on last week. Let's look at that real quick. Again, our goal last week, and we're wrapping up today, was just to kind of practice. Look at an actual DBQ essay prompt that was given here relatively recently in 2019, read over the documents, and try to figure out a way to use those documents as evidence to support whatever argument we came up with. Again, the DBQ is a pain in the butt because it takes a while to set up. It takes a long time to set up. But even that you will get a little bit quicker at as we go. So again, just to review, the writing prompt that we were kind of reading the documents looking to answer, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. They gave you a little map just for reference. Then you had your 7 documents. On your DBQ essays, it's always going to be 7. To get full credit, you've got to use at least 6 of the documents as evidence, but if you can find a way to use all 7, that is preferable. When you're reading through these documents, obviously start with a source. There's usually a lot of good information there. Also, just keep in mind what you're reading it for. You're not just randomly reading random documents. The College Board chose these for a reason. They chose these because as you read them, you're going to see things that the Portuguese are doing or people are saying they're doing that may or may not have transformed maritime trade. So hopefully as you read all 7 of these, your little summaries were, hey, this is what the Portuguese are doing in this particular document that had an impact, that had some sort of impact on the Indian Ocean Trade Network. So just to review, we went through all of the documents last week. And it kind of took a little bit to get there, but we saw some general themes. When you read through your documents, you're always looking for opportunities to kind of lump certain documents together. If you see documents largely doing the same kinds of things, it would just kind of make sense to when you write your essay, talk about these documents together. And also those things that they're doing, guys, that is what your thesis should be. So what we saw in our documents, we saw in a lot of them that the Portuguese were having conflicts with Muslims. We saw in a lot of them at least a passing reference to the building of trading posts. We also saw in some of them, not so much the Portuguese were causing a lot of change here, but that the trade in luxury goods, especially spices, that just seemed to continue on regardless of who was involved. So based on this alone, I mean, you've got enough for a thesis statement. Hey, the Portuguese transformed maritime trade because they conflicted with Muslims and they built trading posts. I mean, that would actually probably be enough to get you the point. It wouldn't be a great thesis, but it'd be enough. If you want to kind of get into something a little bit more complex, you'd get into how maybe they didn't fully transform it because it's still the same basic groups that are connected. It's still largely based on the trade in luxury goods. But here's the deal. You could have gotten different things out of the documents than I did. And that's okay, as long as you can explain yourself and back it up with what the document actually says. That's one of the beautiful things about the DBQ. There's multiple ways to approach it. There's multiple perspectives you could take on what you get out of the documents. But this is what, I got, and I think a lot of us agreed on. So hopefully you got through that. If you didn't, you might want to take a picture or write them down because this does need to be in your notebook. Part 2, we talked about the cap. Okay, there is a point under analysis and reasoning that's all about sourcing the document, taking into account how the historical context, the intended audience, the purpose, and or the point of view might shape what's in the document. It's something that people have problems with, but I'm telling you, if you just try it and go into some detail, you're probably going to get it. You just got to be imaginative. Okay, so a couple that we pulled out, we had the first one there on Friday. I added in a second one I think I just talked about, but I typed it up. These are the sort of things that you could do with it. And again, you've got to do it for 3 separate documents, but you don't have to do every part of CAP for all 3. Man, for one, maybe you do the purpose. For another one, you do the point of view. Certain documents are going to lend themselves to certain aspects of this process. So document 1, if you recall, that was obviously the first document. It's where the Muslim traders were writing the letter to the Hindu king, just bad-mouthing the Portuguese. So I thought about purpose. Why are they doing this? The purpose of this document is to convince the Hindu ruler of Calicut to stop trading with the Portuguese. That's not enough to get you a point. okay? Because that's pretty much just summarizing the document. It's this next part. It's this next part that explains how that may kind of shape what's being said. And it's not super elaborate. It doesn't require too much insight. It's just you drawing conclusions. Muslim merchants had previously been prominent in Indian Ocean trade and likely feared the Portuguese would negatively impact their profits. So the merchants claimed the Portuguese are nothing but pirates who are not to be trusted. We don't know it's true, but it makes sense that it would be true. And there you would get credit for sourcing that particular document. Little tip, when you do this, actually use these words: context, audience, point of view, purpose. Also, when you're describing documents, label them. Just say, hey, in document 1, they're doing such and such. The reason is you want the documents you're using, you want what you're trying to get, the points you're trying to get, to be very explicit. Me, you know, I've got like 150 some odd kids. That means every time we're doing essays, I'm reading 150 of these. By the time I get towards the end, I'm tired. It's all blurring together. I'm half insane. So it's possible I can miss something. You want it to be clear. Now take that logic and expand it to at the actual AP test. Guys, over the summer when I graded DBQs, I think I graded like 900 of them within a week. And after a while, my brain's jello, okay? You want your stuff to be very obvious, okay? There are some kids that actually circle stuff and say, hey, this is my thesis, this is my context. You don't have to do that, but I'm saying you want to make everything that you're doing abundantly clear. That way, you know, whoever's grading it doesn't miss it, because we are human beings. That does occasionally happen. All right, here's another example, document 2. This is the one with the Portuguese official. He's working at the trading post. He's writing a letter to the king, or he's actually writing a report of kind of how they came in control there. And he's talking about how, you know, Calicut and some of the surrounding areas, you know, these wealthy, powerful Muslims were there. But then the king of Portugal shows up and discovers, not that the king was actually there, but he discovers India, and he just runs all these people off. So what I put here, I'm thinking point of view. This guy works for the Portuguese. He's got an agenda. You know, he's going to view the situation a little bit different than maybe somebody else. So the point of view, again, very blunt, you know what I'm trying to do here, of this document is Duarte Barbosa, a Portuguese government official stationed at an Indian trading post. Again, this alone is not enough, because all you've done is identify. You need to explain how that person's point of view might impact in some way, shape, or form what's being said. As an employee of the Portuguese government, Barbosa would have wanted to emphasize the positive effects of the Portuguese establishing trading post there by praising the Portuguese king's discovery of India and how they were able to intimidate the wealthy and powerful Muslim merchants there. Again, I don't know if it's true. I don't know that that's what sort of perspective he was coming from, but it makes sense. And you know, especially when you get into, hey, this may have happened, this may have affected what's being said. Again, you're just expressing your opinion, but you're backing it up with what the documents actually say. That's all it is, guys. So have fun with it. You know, try it. It's actually one of the easier points to get if you really invest the time to do it. I've given you 2, and you could do them on yours pretty similar. One, though, at least one, come up with your own. Get creative, you know, see what you can come up with. The last part that you were supposed to complete for your next notebook check, I need a full-blown intro. 1 paragraph that gives me context, you know, your historical background information that the essay's topic is kind of set in, and a thesis. Now, I'm giving you an example thesis, which is okay. I probably should type it up a little bit more eloquently. But for the context, here's just some things that I would maybe include. Maybe not all of them, maybe just a few of them. But this would be enough to kind of paint a picture of what's going on. Again, we're talking about, you know, the Portuguese transforming, maybe not, Indian Ocean trade. Here's how I would have led into it. I would have thought about, you know, how do you even get to that point? How does this age of exploration start? Why are the Portuguese, you know, really trying to get into the Indian Ocean? So I'd maybe start off with, you know, the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. These militant Muslims have taken over Constantinople, this great Christian city. They turn it into Istanbul, and then they start monopolizing trade. Well, that leads to Europeans to start, you know, using sea-based routes, maritime routes, to try to find alternate ways to Asia, to cut out the middlemen. that alone might be enough for context, but I'd give some more. Again, if you got specific details, throw them in. Why do they want to get to Asia? Luxury goods, spices. Maybe you get into specific examples like pepper, because they reference pepper a lot. You can talk about how Portugal was at the forefront of all this because, they had a monarch that really sponsored exploration and navigation, Henry the Navigator. And being in possession of developed or borrowed maritime navigation technology like the caravel, Portuguese ship design, the compass, lateen sails. That's what gave them the ability for people like Bartolomeo Diaz and Vasco da Gama to ultimately get all the way around Africa, and boom, then they're involved in Indian Ocean trade. Again, that's a lot. And you wouldn't have to do every single thing, but those are the sort of details that I would have put. Because even someone that doesn't know about the time period, if they read that, they're like, okay, well, I understand how we get to this point. I understand why the Portuguese are even there. And that's the goal. That's what context is. With that information, you could segue to a thesis such as this. Thesis statements have to be either in the introduction or the conclusion, so the beginning or the end. I think it's good to put them in both, but it just makes sense, in the introduction to lay out your argument, because the rest of the essay, honestly, you should just be trying to prove that this particular argument's true. So I looked at the summaries of the docs. I looked at the sort of things that we were seeing, and I thought about conflict with Muslims and building trading posts and luxury goods, and that is my thesis. That's what I'm going to try to prove, because I know that that's what the documents are talking about. So here's what I came up with. Although the Portuguese caused change within the Indian Ocean trade network through their frequent clashes with Islamic merchants and their construction of trading posts, they did not completely transform this network, as the main focus of trade in the Indian Ocean continued to be the import and export of luxury goods connecting traditional Asian markets. Now, that last part I could have left off. I probably would have been okay if I just, stuck to clashes with Islamic merchants and trading posts. But adding that in, it makes it a little bit more complex. It gives me kind of a counter argument, which is not something you have to do, but it's never a bad idea. Guys, that's all it is. And once you get to this point, if you can get to this point in DBQ, then yeah, you got to write the thing. But then you got a sense of direction. Then you got a game plan. You would want to lump documents together when you talk about them in your essay based on what they're doing. Maybe I'd spend the first couple paragraphs talking about the documents and talk about conflicts with Muslims. Then maybe I'd go, adding in the trading post stuff. Then maybe I'd exclusively focus on the documents that focus on the trade and luxury goods. Again, this process gives you organization for your essay. It gives you your thesis statement. Again, it's lengthy and it's not fun, but it is doable. You just got to take the time to do it. So that is that. Now, for me, something is kind of complicated as a DBQ. Sometimes it helps to hear it from someone else. So we are going to watch a little High English history video where he's going to break down kind of his advice on how to write a DBQ essay. And he's going to explain things a little bit different in some instances, pretty identical in others. But again, for something like this, maybe hearing him say it a little bit differently might help with your understanding. I'll pause it from time to time. He actually references the writing prompt that we've been working on. He's going to give you a sample thesis for that, which is, comparable to what we did, but a little bit different. But just pay attention. And like I said, as we go, if you want to jot down some notes, you are perfectly fine. He's going to explain the rubric to you, okay, and kind of talk about all the ways you can get those points. After this video, we're going to read at least one essay, and we're going to try to apply that rubric to the essay. We're going to try to grade it and just kind of see what they did good, what they did bad. If time permits, I think it will. So pay attention and enjoy our one video of the day.
Hey there, welcome back to High English History. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to get a perfect score on the dreaded document-based question, or the DBQ, for AP US History, AP World History, and AP European History. And for most students, this is the most difficult thing they have to do in these courses. So if you need to go have yourself a proper cry, then pause this and go do it. Regardless, in this video, I'm going to walk you through the scoring rubric point by point and teach you how to get every dang one of those points. So if you're ready to get the brain cow's milk, I'm ready. Let's get to it. Now, let me just quickly mention that this video is just one part of my AP essay cram course, which actually goes into much greater depth on how to write DBQs and LEQs and SAQs for AP World and AP US and AP Europe. It's got examples for every point on the rubric that will show you how to earn the point and what doesn't earn the point. Plus, there's videos from this First, let's talk about the exam itself. When you open your exam to the DBQ, you will have 60 minutes to read your documents and write your essay. And you will see a prompt followed by 7 documents. No more, no less. And just as a note, if in your classroom you're seeing DBQs with more or less than 7 documents, just know that on the official exam, you'll have exactly 7. And your job is to use evidence from those 7 documents to support an argument in response to the prompt. Okay, now let's go through the steps of what you need to do to score well on this DBQ. Step 1, read and understand the question. And it's going to be very tempting for a lot of people just to read the prompt quickly and then get right onto the documents. Don't be that guy. Stop yourself. Read it carefully. Mark up the prompt. What time period are they asking you about? Remember that the 16th century, for example, equals the 1500s, so don't get confused by the century. If you do get confused by those things, then write down the dates that they're asking you about so that you don't get confused. Furthermore, what is the historical thinking skill embedded in the question? Is it asking you to compare 2 things or talk about change over time, etc.? You need to write this down, highlight it, bold it, get it tattooed on your forehead because that's the kind of essay you will be required to write. If the prompt asks you to compare things, then make sure your essay is comparing things. Sometimes the historical thinking skill won't be obvious, but it is there. Sometimes it asks you a question and you can decide whether you want to use causation or change over time or comparison. It'll be up to you, but just make sure you understand what you are doing. Let me just explain by giving you an example prompt. Evaluate the extent to which the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States from 1890 to 1920. All right, did you see the historical thinking skill? This kind of essay, the one that they want you to write, is a change essay, and more specifically, to what degree was there change? Second, you need to note any categories that they're giving you, and in the prompt I just showed you, note that it's asking about political change. Now, the progressive movement fostered an awful lot of social change as well, but that is not what they are asking about. They're asking about political change, so your essay should be about political change. Third, note the time period they give you. In this case, it's 1890 to 1920. Your essay needs to deal with issues from within that time period. Now, I know this probably seems intuitive for a lot of you, but remember, and I never tire of saying this, when you are under pressure, you are dumber than you think. What seems so very clear right now while you're free of the pressure will become murky and cloudy when the clock starts ticking. And as someone who has scored thousands of these essays on the national level, take it from me. I have seen beautifully written essays that don't address the topic of the prompt or write about a similar theme in a different time period, and they get little to no points for. So read the question carefully and spend the time to do what may feel remedial for you, mark it up thoroughly, and understand it. Step 2, read through the documents relatively quickly. They suggest you take 15 minutes to read through the documents, which will leave you 45 minutes for writing. In that 15 minutes, you need to be looking at the following. First, what is the source of the document? Who is speaking and to whom? Also note where in the timeline that you're writing about does this document sit, and note those things because it'll help later when it comes to sourcing, and if you don't know what that means, don't worry, I'll explain later. Second, summarize the main idea of the document with reference to the prompt. Keep in mind that they're giving you these documents as evidence because they think that these documents will help you answer the question. So the little exercise that I go through when looking at a document is this. If I only had this document, how would it answer the question? So think about that and then write it down right next to the document. Third, group your documents into 2 to 3 groups. With 7 documents, 3 groups is probably going to be the upper limit on what you can viably create. So if the prompt is asking you about the causes of imperialism and you're reading through the documents and you see 3 of them mention religious reasons and 4 have to do with economic reasons, then group them like that. And I want to emphasize grouping documents into categories because of a common error I've seen when we've scored your essays nationally. A common mistake is to see a student use their documents like this. In document 1 it says, in document 2 it says, in document 3 it says, in document 4 it says, and then on and on and on. The student just goes through all the documents in order. Now, theoretically, you could still get full points on your essay by handling the documents in that way. But let me just say that the vast majority of those essays do very poorly. When you start listing the documents in order, it's usually a signal to the reader that this person doesn't have a coherent grasp on his or her argument. But grouping the documents by category is a higher level cognitive exercise, and it shows that you've made connections between the documents that sets you on your way to a good score. Okay, step 3, get a 7. Okay, now that you've read and understood the prompt and you've analyzed and grouped your documents, it's time to start writing. And what I'd like to do now is walk through the DBQ rubric point by point and show you how to earn each one in turn. I'll just be talking generally at this point and giving basic guidelines. First point, thesis. And you can earn earn 0 to 1 points for this. Now, your thesis is arguably one of the most important things you're going to do in this essay because it's going to organize and anticipate everything else you're going to write. So make sure you spend your time getting the thesis right. Now, in order to earn this point, the rubric says that you must write 1 or 2 sentences which are historically defensible and establishes a line of reasoning. So you won't get the point here for merely restating the prompt. Your thesis should actually be your argument in miniature. And your thesis needs to be additionally specific, which is to say you must mention specific historical evidence in your thesis. This is different from your English class where they want you to be sparse in your thesis and then reveal more later. Not so here. Your thesis needs to be packed tighter than a Christmas haggis. Now, let me give you a formula for doing this, and I'll show you an example of a thesis that earns the point. Here's the formula. Despite counter-argument, because evidence 1 and evidence 2, my argument. Now, the reason there's a placeholder for a counter-argument is because it'll set you up nicely for the complexity point later on. Now, let me give you an example of a thesis in this format that would earn the point. Here's the prompt from the 2019 AP World History PBQ. Evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. And now here's the thesis that would earn the point. Despite the argument that the arrival of the Portuguese was a fundamental change in Indian Ocean maritime trade in the 16th century, there's my counter-argument, because the Portuguese never extended their political control beyond a few ports, that's my first piece of evidence, and had to compete with Indian Ocean merchants in regional states such as the Ottoman Empire, there's evidence number 2, their arrival made a modest change at best, and there's mine.
Okay, so this is more of your complex thesis statement. It is not a requirement, but it's kind of a good one to do. You will also notice that he's not saying the same things that we did. We said more, hey, you know, they did make a big historical impact. He's saying, no, not really. You know, they just had a few ports. And they still had to compete with these Indian Ocean merchants, so yeah, not a big deal. Neither one of us is wrong. We just viewed the documents a little bit different. As long as we can support our thesis with what the documents say, you're golden. So again, it's kind of weird, and it takes some getting used to. Yours does not have to be that elaborate, but if you can make it that way, that is a great structure. Also, something that you mentioned earlier, I don't know if you guys are aware, if you take AP US history or AP European history, which we don't have Euro right now, but if enough people sign up for it, who knows, maybe we do. Guys, it's the same sort of writing. Okay, they have DBQs, SAQs, LEQs, it's the same rubrics, it's the same structure, it's the same ACE format, it's all that stuff, okay, same CAT process. So if you can get some of this stuff down at this level, later on, especially like in AP US history, it's just gonna carry right up. So again, there are some advantages. Those 3 classes do good.
My argument. So notice how that establishes a line of reasoning, and it is very specific. That thesis earns the point. Okay, moving down the rubric, the second point is for contextualization. For this, you can earn between 0 and 1 point. Contextualization is there to situate your argument in the larger historical context. And the rubric tells you that you can explain the historical context before, during, or after the period of the prompt. Here's where I tell you that I've never scored an essay that is successfully contextualized during or after the prompt. Like, it's possible and it's available to you if you want to do it, but by far the most intuitive way to earn this point is by explaining the events that occurred before the time period that you were given. Now, how far before the time period should you go? Let's go back to that Portuguese trading prompt. Now, technically speaking, the Neolithic Revolution could be linked by causation to Portuguese trade. After all, the Portuguese state and its ability to trade on the sea would never have arisen if people hadn't learned to farm 10,000 years before. But that's not the kind of context we're talking about. Look at the immediate context and go from there. In U.S. history and European history, a good guideline is about 50 to 100 years before the timeline of your prompt. For world history, maybe 100 to 200 years, depending on the prompt. So in the Portuguese trading example, in order to properly contextualize, we need to know about the Indian Ocean trade before the Portuguese showed up. Also, it would be relevant to talk about specific maritime technology that enabled the Portuguese to enter the Indian Ocean trade. Now, notice that I said the word relevant. Your contextualization needs to relate to the prompt. So, technically speaking, the Crusades happened before the entry of the Portuguese into the Indian Ocean trade, but it's not really relevant. So my advice is to name 2 to 3 specific vocabulary words that occurred before the time period of the prompt, and then use 2 to 3 sentences defining those words and showing how they set the stage for your argument. And that second part is crucial. You have to draw the connection between your context and your argument. Okay, now let's get to the next part of the rubric, the evidence section. As I mentioned, you're going to have 7 documents to work with. I'm going to give you the point breakdown first and then show you how to earn it. In this section, you can earn a total of 3 points. 1 point is is awarded for successfully describing the contents of 3 of the documents in relation to the prompt. 2 points are awarded for supporting your argument with at least 6 documents. Now, as a little side note here, I recommend that you use all 7 documents, because if you get an interpretation wrong, then you can still get all the points. Okay, so that's 2 points in the evidence section. You can earn the remaining 1 point by writing about evidence related to your prompt, but which is not mentioned in the document. This is called evidence beyond the documents, and if you do that successfully, 1 point. Okay, I admit that was a lot, but let me just try to explain it a little, and let's start with your handling of the document. So let me just say it out of the gate. Don't quote from the document. The people reading and scoring your essay know these documents backwards and forwards, so don't waste your time quoting from them, because it will earn you nothing and will waste your time. Now, I said there was a difference in points based on whether you describe the documents or argued with them. And this difference is not easy for a lot of students to grasp. So let me just try to give you an example outside of DBQ. Suppose you wake up with a fever one day and your parents say you have to stay home from school and go to the doctor. And then further suppose that you have a major test that day. So you go to the doctor and you miss your test. And when you pull up your grades later that afternoon, you see that the teacher has entered a 0 for that test grade. And now you're very much failing that class. So the next day you go back to school and you have an argument to make. I should be able to take that exam and replace the 0 in the grade book. And your teacher has no idea why you were gone, and so they would probably say, no. So now you have to go 1 step further. You have to hand your teacher the note from the doctor, and you say, look, it says here that I was at the doctor getting tested for the flu and that it was positive. Okay, at that point, all you've done is made an argument. I should be able to take the test, and you put your evidence in their hand. And at this point, maybe your teacher remains unconvinced because the argument and the evidence are not yet connected. So let's go 1 step further. At this point, you need to connect your argument with your evidence. So you're going to say something like this: because I was sick and contagious, and proof of that is right here in this document, it would not have been socially responsible for me to show up and take that exam. Therefore, you should allow me to retake. Okay, now that is a coherent argument supported by evidence. So to me, the key to getting this point comes down to 2 things. First is the grouping of the documents, which I already talked about. Second is topic sentences for your body paragraph. So suppose I've grouped documents 1, 3, and 5 as, say, economic documents. In order to use those in support of an argument, I'd start my paragraph by writing a topic sentence that explained why economics was the cause of such and such. And then within the paragraph, I use my documents to demonstrate why that is true. Okay, the next part of the evidence section is the 1 point for evidence beyond the document. To earn this point, you need to connect a specific piece of evidence to the argument of your prompt. Also, it cannot be something that's in the documents themselves. This requires you to name it and explain what it was, and then connect it back to your argument. 3 things: name it, explain it, and connect it. People tend to lose this point because they can usually name a piece of evidence, but they forget to explain it and connect it. And there's no specific place that you need to do this. Just stick it in wherever it's relevant. Now, with respect to evidence beyond the documents, there is not a specific time period given to you on the rubric. For example, it doesn't say that your evidence beyond the documents has to come from within the same time period as the prompt. It can come before or after. However, usually when you're using evidence to support an argument, it'll probably come from roughly the same time period you're writing about. AP US readers are far more strict about this than AP World or APR readers, just so you know. The safest thing to do with evidence beyond the documents is just use evidence from within the same time period you're writing about. And the last section of the rubric is for analysis and reasoning. And for this section, you can earn up to 2 points. The first section is about sourcing documents, and you can earn 1 point there. Now, this is one of the harder things for most students to do, so let me try to explain. To source a document means to show how that document's historical situation, audience, purpose, or point of view is relevant to the interpretation of the document. To source for historical situation means that you place the document in its larger historical context. So if your document is Lincoln's second inaugural address, then it might be important to know its historical situation, which is to say it was given in the midst of the American Civil War. To source for audience, you need to demonstrate why it's important for us to know to whom this was written. For example, a personal letter might say something much different about a person than a political stump speech, and the difference comes down to audience. To source for purpose, you need to explain what a document was intended to do, not what it says, but what it did. If you have a nationalistic speech from a leader of a colonized nation, then you need to tell us what that speech actually accomplished. Did the people rise up and demand independence because of this, etc., etc. To source for point of view, you need to answer the question, why does he or she say what he or she says in the way that he or she says? And the special sauce of point of view analysis comes from the end of that question, in the way that he or she says. Now, you only have to perform one of those sourcing skills for each document that you try to source. So, for example, if you're going to source document 2, you don't have to go through all 4 of those those sourcing skills on document 2. Just choose the one that makes the most sense for that document. If you successfully source 3 documents, you get 1 point. And the final part of this section of the rubric is the most difficult to achieve, and it's the complexity point. And for this, you can earn up to 1 point. Now, let me just tell you, only 2% of all students who write DBQs earn this point. It is very rare. At the end of the day, here's what this point is about. Is your essay nuanced? Does it analyze multiple variables? Does it explain the complexity of the topic at hand with skill and beauty? If so, you'll earn this point. So if you're writing an essay about changes over time, then maybe also include the continuity. If you're comparing things and talking about their similarities, then maybe also talk about their differences. Remember, we've already set ourselves up for a counter-argument in the thesis. If we can weave together that counter-argument through the whole essay and show how the relevant evidence supports it, but might not be the best reading of the evidence, well, then you might be on your way to earning this point. Now, as I said,
Now that last point is, in my mind, just kind of ridiculous how the College Board set it up. They almost give themselves an out to not give you a point because they really can't even define what it is. When I did my training, to grade DBQs a long time ago from the College Board, I was like, well, what does that really look like? They were like, it's like this feeling you get. You just kind of know it when you see it. And that, to me, something that vague, I don't think is exactly fair. It's rare to get it on the real DBQ. In here, if you have a rock solid essay and you go above and beyond and you show more content knowledge than you absolutely need, I'm probably going to give it to you. Just knowing the real thing, very rarely awarded. All right, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I think we got enough to do this, just real quick. I'm going to show you this. You may want to open up these 2 documents, the AP scoring rubric and the sample essays. The rubric, he just went over it, but essentially what I want you to do, don't worry about grading it exactly. But as you read, I'm just going to have you read one essay. I want you to think, are these things there? Is this a quality essay? Because we're going to go over it. I'm going to look at a few things. I'm going to show you some examples of how people actually got some of these points. Does it have a thesis? Is there a central argument that reflects what's actually in the documents? Do they establish context? Again, that needs to be right up front. A little bit of background. Doesn't have to be, more than maybe 3 sentences or so, but it needs to effectively paint the picture of kind of what that situation, what that time period, what this prompt is over. Evidence. Do they use at least, 3 of the documents? They could get 1 point for that. Do they use at least 6? They can get 2, but it does need to connect to their thesis statement. Do they mention anything that's not in the documents? Some sort of piece of history that they just happen to know about that, well, makes the argument a little bit richer. Finally, and we're not even going to worry about the complex understanding because that's very debatable. Do they explain the cap? Do they get into the sourcing? Do they explain how point of view or context or whatever? Do they even attempt that? Now, I will tell you, in this first essay you're going to read, it's not overt, which means some of it's easy to miss. But yeah, some of it is there. So just kind of reflect on that as you read this. Go ahead and open up that document. It's going to look like this. Now, there's 2 essays here. Okay, there's 1A, which is 4 pages. And not quite 4 pages, 3 1/4. And then there's 1C, which is only 2. 1C is not all that great. Let's focus on reading the first essay. Now, I can't give you too long. Let's say about 6 minutes to just give it a once over. Again, don't worry about actually grading it, but think as you're going, are they doing these things? Are they using the documents? Are they trying to explain some of the sourcing issues? Do they have a thesis? Do they have context? I think once you kind of see it played out, it's going to make a little bit more sense. So let's say 5, 6 minutes, and then we'll just wrap up real quick at the very end, and I'll actually show you some of the things that they did. So 5, 6 minutes, give it a good once over. Just essay 1A. if you finish early, just look back at the rubric, kind of see if you can guesstimate a grade. But I'm only going to give you guys another minute or so because of my lack of time management, not your fault. So do what you can. At least get through the first few paragraphs because there's some good examples worth pointing out. All right, we're going to stop there. And I know you're like, oh, Mr. Brown, I wasn't done. Hopefully you got through, like I said, the first few paragraphs at least, maybe the first page and a half, hopefully. But based on what you read, is this a pretty decent essay? Guys, it's got a 7. It's got every point. And I think some of you are looking at it and saying, well, I ain't all that great. It's not. But you got to understand this is a formula. You're following a rubric. You're catering to the rubric. And you're giving the graders exactly what they're asking for. Stylistically, it's not bad, don't get me wrong, but this got every single point. So let's look at just a couple of them, give you some examples. All right, so a few things that I just kind of pulled out. First paragraph, you get your context and your thesis. See if I can read this. In the 16th century, rising technological innovations led to an increase in trade and exploration. European countries struggled to rise in power and sought new trade routes to increase both their empirical power as well as to improve their economy. As many Europeans did not have the proper geography to grow cash crops themselves, namely sugar and spices, they sought to acquire them for cheaper by removing the middleman in the Middle East and to create their own direct trading line. The Portuguese first found a way to achieve spices, which is kind of a weird way to say it, by traveling along the coast of Africa around the Cape of Good Hope and arriving at their trading posts. This isn't fantastic. It's not just filled with details, but they give us some of the reasons that they're doing it, to enter the spice trade. They give us, the specific crop of sugar. They talk about how they were the first by going around Africa. I would like a little bit more detail, but guys, that's enough. Here we've got the thesis, a little bit different than ours, different conclusion to some extent, but again, it's still based on the documents and it's still valid. It's just a different way of interpreting things. Despite the personal loyalty between established merchants and empires making them deal unequally with the Portuguese traders, the Portuguese greatly transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean by removing trade from the traditional Muslim merchants and by imparting trade regulations and restrictions on other empires. So kind of what we said, they're replacing Muslim merchants as the main powers in the Indian Ocean. They're also, if you look here, they don't say it specifically, but through their trading posts, they're patrolling the seas. They're charging taxes or tolls to traders. I mean, that's pretty solid, and the documents back it up. Couple things here. This first thing I circled, this is outside evidence. Could be better, but it does just enough. As shown by Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca, the Islamic faith had been greatly influential in Africa. Merchants and kings showing the same religion had established a feeling of brotherhood and allowed for easier business transactions. I'd like a little bit more detail about Mansa Musa, but it's outside evidence. It fits. It works within the context of the essay itself. It's not ever referenced in the document, so it works. This one's not great, but this is an example of him, sourcing a document. And I believe this is document 1, the same one that we sourced. This particular advice given to the Calicut ruler is influenced by the growing power of the Portuguese and demonstrates the fear Muslim merchants had that their power and influence were waning. It could do more, but it does just enough. Now that one, it's not overt, it's not obvious. That's something that could get missed. So I would definitely get into purpose and point of view and actually label those things. But guys, I'm telling you, this is doable. If you read the whole essay, and if you didn't, I encourage you to do so. The second essay isn't nearly as good. It only got 2. But just seeing essays, they've actually been written regarding the prompt that you've looked at, I think it could really help. Tomorrow we are going to get into some new material. We're going to start delving into Unit 5, but we're we're just really going to dip our toes in the water of that for the time being. We'll pick up with Unit 5 and the Age of Revolutions after the break.